I had trouble organizing the slides and working through the script of this video. This is the latest in my series Boot Camp for Saints, where I work through the different sections of the Gospel of Mark as it relates to the signs of the zodiac. This is Virgo for 2019. Now the Virgo section by far is the shortest of all the sections. It only has 20 verses in one chapter, chapter 9, verses 20 through 30. It's kind of depressing because I'm a Virgo and I was looking forward to this section. Don't you love us, Mark? Turns out he does, maybe a little bit too much, because I have a strong suspicion we're looking at the heavy hand of a censor here. Now, long story short, I believe Jesus marries another man in the Gospel of Mark, Lazarus. Now, Lazarus is not named here, but he is named in the Gospel of John, because Mark was probably the first of the Gospels written, and when it was written, it was dangerous to name names. But later on, everybody had moved on to God. It's decades later, and so John was able to do that. So I don't think the censor liked what Mark was doing with the sayings and the parables in this section. So he cut them out, at least one of each. Now the saying and the parable do show up in other Gospels though. And by other, I also include the Gospel of Thomas. This is a collection of sayings of Jesus, sayings only, there's no narrative. I'm convinced it goes to the 1st century AD, the 2nd century AD at the latest. And regardless of that, it's not too late, and regardless of what you think of the motive of the editor for the Gospel of Thomas, it's still an important witness to the Gospel texts themselves. Now, also, the narrative flow of Mark's Gospel is violated by this gap in the Virgo section. Big enough to drive a Mack truck through, as we used to say. Although I haven't heard that said since the 1970s, now that I think about it. Now, Virgo has the famous passage of Jesus holding a child and using him as an example. Whoever wants to be the first must be the last of all and the servant of all. Amen. But very soon afterwards, in Luke's Gospel, he has the saying, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And then right after that, in Matthew's Gospel, he has the parable of the lost sheep. Now, both of these narratives fit perfectly into the Virgo section, but neither of them are in Mark, much less the Virgo section. I mean, they're not there at all. Now, the gap is more blatant when you compare and contrast all the other Gospels. The saying on the harvest and the laborers is in Matthew and Luke, but it's in different context. It's in the Gospel of Thomas, and it's in the Gospel of John. And that's strange because John is always off in John land. He rarely ever repeats what you see in the other Gospels. Yet he has that saying. And Mark apparently did not. I don't believe that. Matthew, Luke, and Thomas also have the lost sheep parable. Matthew and Luke, once again, in different context. John, as I said, came decades later, and as I also said, he rarely ever repeats what's in the other Gospels, and this is not an exception, because I think it's a conscious editorial decision on his part. He knows you've already heard that parable, but what he does do is he goes one step further. He probes some interesting questions. What is Jesus' nature as the shepherd? What is the nature of one whom he would call his sheep, of which I would like to include myself? The fact that everyone, except for Mark apparently, agrees that Jesus saw himself as the shepherd of a flock, that it was considered an important part of his mission, is confirmed in the Gospel of John. He covers that for full 18 chapters. It scandalizes the Pharisees. But Mark, there's nothing. But there's a gap in the narrative. Earlier on, Jesus has mercy on people because they are sheep without a shepherd. Later, near the end, he tells his disciples that the shepherd will be struck down and his sheep will be scattered. So once again, they will have no shepherd. But in the meantime, he's not stepping up to become the good shepherd. That's what I mean. There's a big gap. That's impossible. Another problem I had organizing this video and writing the script revolves around my problems with the Coma Berenice. Now, that is a deacon of Virgo. That's a constellation that's associated with it. All the zodiac signs have deacons. Now, the Reverend Bill Darlison missed the mark on this. Maybe there was something to it, but he certainly did not make his case. Now, Reverend Darlison wrote the Gospel and the Zodiac, which you can use as a textbook to follow along in this series. So I had to unlearn what he taught me, and that's always kind of difficult. And I had to look at other views of what that particular constellation was about. But there's still a lot of ambiguity in all of the deacons of this sign. I suppose in all the deacons, period, but we do the best that we can. So, let's get to work. The sinusoidal wave here is how we see the sun and the stars that are set against its background throughout the year. I wish I thought to use this slide in previous videos. It's fantastic. I know I'll use it in the future. This obviously is about Virgo. One of her deacons, as I said, is Coma Berenices, after Queen Berenices II of Egypt, but also just Coma. Everyone I see on the internet says it means the desired in Hebrew, although that's actually Chemadath. So more accurately, the Hebrews might have called it something like Komadath. I can't actually find anything on this in sources that I can trust, though. Desired is allegedly understood by the Hebrews as the desired child in Virgo's lap. That's what the Egyptians called it, and the Sumerians, the people who built the world's first civilization. So regardless of what the Hebrews thought of it, and they probably thought that of it, Virgo has traditionally been associated by everyone with children, and Coma was her child. Thus you will find children in the Virgo section of Mark. In Greek, the word Coma means hair, so they might have dropped the daf, if it was ever there, and made this constellation into Berenice's hair. Mark will splendidly make use of this constellation in both of its senses. Now, as I told you, you will not find a shepherd in the Virgo section of Mark's Gospel, although it should be here, because of Boates. Typically shown as a herdsman with his dogs, the name means ox driver, a plowman, but apparently it can also mean a herdsman in general. Part of the fog of ambiguity I can't penetrate at this time for this video. The shepherd, of course, is a form of a herdsman. He's holding his two dogs by a leash in his upraised hand, the canis venatiki to his right, to our right. The Greeks are all over the place with where this guy is at in their mythology, but what is important is he's a farmer and a herdsman. The final deacon is Centaurus, a half man and a half beast among the Greeks and even among the ancient Sumerians. Now, Aries is also known as the hired man among the Sumerians, and hired men show up in the Aries section, so I think I'm permitted to also treat Boates as he was known among the Sumerians. Shupa. And bringing all three of these deacons together with Virgo, a theme emerges. Heaven and earth, and time and eternity. Because it's not just space, it's space-time. And of course, as the Son of God, and God incarnate in the flesh, Jesus was well aware of that. Now, this video links to at least two of my other videos. This slide is from, sometimes it actually is Adam and Steve, which I link below. Looking at Shupa has brought me right back to the fabled Gilgamesh, who in turn has already made an appearance in the Leo section, and I've already talked about his role in the later Scorpio section. Looking at Shupa has allowed me to get to the bottom of what the Pukku and Miku almost certainly were, and why the Netherworld decided to get involved with what looks to our modern eyes to be little more than a silly game. And I treated this quote in my video, How the Brain and the Body Work Together, also linked below. It's in the Virgo section. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into hell, where their worm never dies and the fire is never quenched. Talk about heaven and earth and eternity and time. Now, the Catholics will tell you this is about masturbation and child molestation. It is not. It's about our bodies being out of control. It's a very big deal. And in that video, I compared this passage to Medusa, the incarnation of a psychological complex, which can set us at war with ourselves, locking up all of our energy, immobilizing us, sometimes for decades. I've seen it myself, as if we're locked in stone. Coma Berenices is going to bring us right back to Medusa, thereby confirming my interpretation of this passage. Let's see what Reverend Darlison has to say about Virgo in general. We noted in the chapter on Aries, there's Aries again, that in the ancient world, Virgo was considered to be the leading constellation in the zodiac circle. The association of Virgo with birth and children makes it an appropriate starting point for any symbolic account of the spiritual journey. Both Matthew and Luke started with the birth of Jesus, surely a Virgo story if there ever was one. Mark, on the other hand, has plans for his Virgo story, plans that my theoretical censor did not like at all, which is why he cut so much out of the Virgo section. The Jews, apparently, called this harvest constellation Bethula and associated with the tribe of Asher, of whom Jacob had declared, "His bread shall be fat," Genesis 49:20. Symbolically, Virgo is the house of bread, which in Hebrew is Bethlehem, Beth, house, Lehem, bread, where we become children once more, stripped of our pretensions and our cynicism, and open to the promptings of the Spirit. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke are both prefaced by stories in which these themes are prominent. Mark, who has chosen to structure his narrative around the yearly cycle, beginning with Aries, has to introduce them halfway through. And this is exactly why the harvest quotes belong in the Virgo section. Like we see in Luke, just a few verses after he talks about the children, his parallel to Mark's Virgo section. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves." Virgo tells us a lot about the Church and the Virgin Mary. The Feast of the Assumption of the Virgin is celebrated on 15 August, and the birth of the Virgin on 8 September. On or around the first of these dates, as the sun leaves the constellation Leo and approaches Virgo, the powerful rays of the sun apparently eliminate the fainter lights from Virgo stars. The Virgin is assumed into the glory of the sun, or as the book of Revelation has it, she is clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. That's Revelation 12:12. Emphasis added. On 8 September, the Virgin is born as her stars once more become visible at sunrise. Now, there's an interesting footnote, though, so don't go rush out at the skies and check this out nowadays. Owing to the precession of the equinoxes, these dates no longer apply. Now, the sun passes through this constellation from mid-September to late October. I say Virgo is about heaven and earth. This is one of the reasons why. The Virgo description in Darlison's book are spot on with me, by the way. Virgo is an earth sign, connected with the harvest, so they say, but it is also a mutable sign. Immutability and earth are strange bedfellows. Indeed, earth is the element that responds least well to change, and love of variety is not as evident in Virgo as it is with the other mutable signs. Mayo, who's an author, considers that the mutable earth combination produces people that are self-repressive, yes, passive, yes, restrained, yes, with qualities of practicality, adaptability, and variableness. Qualities which manifest as an ability to collate and catalog, to create order, to systematize. That's what I'm doing right now. That's what I do in all of my videos. People in whom the Virgo principle operate strongly generally shun the limelight, but they are excellent workers, well able to provide a practical structure for someone else's grand but hazy and uninformed ideas. Yes, I generally avoid the limelight, but I do these videos because I have to, because I need people to talk about these things. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the question of original sin, the sin of the flesh. What is its nature? How does it trip us up? Does it have something to do with the fact that we have sex? No, it has nothing to do with that. We're built to have sex. It's because we're earthlings, and we are of the earth. We are of the ground. And at this point, we're also mortal, so we are bound by time. Yet, we also have within us the Spirit of God, and we're made in God's image. So we also have roots stretching into heaven, and therefore eternity. Time and eternity, heaven and earth, the themes of Virgo. But the earth is cursed. The ground is cursed, the very thing we pull our bodies out of. Either God curses it, or it's cursed as a result of our action, and God just declares that. I don't read Hebrew, I just look at the interlinear text, and it seems to me it can go either way. So, we are by our natures cursed, once again, not because we have sex, but because we are earthlings. And that means, among other things, that we are afflicted with neuroses, mental health problems, embodied most excellently, I think, in the person of Medusa. If you look at the Hebrew, this dilemma is quite clear. The wordplay on Hebrew Adam, human being here translated as man, and Adamah, arable land, here ground, introduces a motif characteristic of this tradition, the relation of humankind with the soil from which it is formed. Human nature is not a duality of body and soul. That's Descartes, throw him out. Rather, God's breath animates the dust and it becomes a single living being. So we're heaven and earth. You can't have one without the other. Now, it's common to make fun of us Christians over original sin. But if you take Moses seriously, you have to take original sin seriously. Does the Bible ever say this stopped being a problem? It does not. Now, if you have a computer and you want to upgrade the firmware of the operating system, what do you do after you download the update? You have to reboot the computer. You have to kill it and raise it again. So if the Son of Man says he has to die and be raised again on our behalf, doesn't that sound like a reboot? And doesn't it seem like we ourselves need to be rebooted? But we can't do that. and nobody can do it for us, and neither can we do it for anybody else. So God incarnate in the flesh did it for us. Now in Scripture, God tells the Israelites that he will give them a new heart. An operating system has a new heart. It's called a kernel. Now if you have to reboot your computer, kill it and raise it again just to get a simple update, how much more must you reboot that computer if you're going to switch kernels? Now there's supposed to be free will, and there is. We're free to choose our masters. Will you choose sin or will you choose God? But a master you will choose. I see it every day. I see denial every day too. And this is where the centaur comes in. Half human, half beast, even among the Sumerians. He's in the bottom half of the sky. Now if you are a centaur, you have chosen badly. And what about Boates? Well, I find Reverend Darlison's explanation unacceptable. And that's fine. Can't win them all. His source, Sais, uses terms like Hebrew and Oriental roots and Oriental elements. That bothers me, not because I think it's racist, but because it's nebulous. How does he arrive at this conclusion? Also, this quote from Matthew, from chapter 18, verse 11, actually isn't in his gospel. It's not in the earliest and most reliable copies, so translators have started to leave it out. It seems to have been imported from Luke 19:10. But I like the fact that Boates is a farmer and a herdsman, and I like this. The story has an obvious relationship with the Virgoan concern for the details. Most of us would be content that 99 were safe, and we wouldn't be inclined to jeopardize that safety by seeking out the straying sheep. This is so Virgo, and this is so me. I don't want to brag, but I think that attention to detail shows up in my videos. So now, I think it's time to bring in Shupa. Shupa probably represents the high god Enlil, who is considered to be the leader of the Babylonian pantheon. As a mark of his exalted status, he holds a symbol known as the rod and ring. He is closely associated with the ropes of heaven, which figuratively bind together the various levels of the cosmos and regulate the temporal movement of the heavens. Enlil rules the earth, so it's fitting that his constellation should be associated with an earth sign, and it's also fitting that he be associated with farmers. And Enlil isn't holding dog leashes. He's holding the rod and the ring and the ropes of heaven. And what are they about? Well, let's look at this. A new look at the Mesopotamian rod and ring, emblems of time and eternity. Mary Abram looks at every single known instance of the rod and ring in Middle Eastern art and comes to a quite reliable conclusion. Here they are on the left. Here they are with the ropes of heaven on the right. Which brings us back to Gilgamesh and our Puku and Miku, which are lost to the netherworld. And if she's right about what these are, it's not a surprise that the netherworld would suddenly get involved. Tablet 12 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, likely in addition to the original text, parallels the older Sumerian poem, Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld. In the poem, Inanna, a Sumerian version of Ishtar, plants a hulupu tree in her holy garden. It is subsequently infested by the serpent who could not be charmed, the Anzu bird, and the dark maid Lilith. Gilgamesh divests the hulupu of these creatures. In gratitude, Inanna fashions for him the puku from the tree's trunk and a miku from its crown. Samuel Kramer defines the puku and miku as probably a drum and drumstick. In another publication on the subject, Kramer acknowledges the uncertainty of this translation. In yet another publication, Kramer and Volkstein note that the puku and miku may be the rod and the ring. Jordan parallels these devices with the drum, but asks if they possess an intricate power of life. Pertinent to this discussion, Gilgamesh loses these objects due to misusing their powers. His vainglorious use of the puku brings bitterness, lamentation, and tears to the mothers, sisters, and the young maidens of Uruk, so that the wet earth opens and the puku and the miku are lost in the underworld. Kramer suggests that the women cried because Gilgamesh used the puku and miku, drum and drumstick, to summon their men to war. If, however, the puku and miku are the ring and the rod associated with life forces abused by Gilgamesh, the lamentation of the women takes on a different context. So here's her conclusion on the matter, and I think she is right. The rod represents the temporal measurement of life that begins and ends. The ring represents the eternal aspect of life, a concept familiar to Mesopotamians as indicated by the story of eternal life bestowed by deity upon the mortal Utnapishtim. That's their version of Noah. The conjoined rod and ring signify the power to create, maintain, and end life. Together, they are emblems of time and eternity. But it's not all smooth sailing at Virgo. Mark's text goes on to describe two dangers of the Virgoan stage. The first of these is perfectionism, which can manifest as insularity or the holier-than-thou mentality. Mayo calls this the Virgoan need to be pure and free from the influence of others. Well, that's very, very true for me, certainly. And the second warning of this section concerns Virgoan passivity, or, as Carter has it, lack of spiritual aspiration and appreciation, and echoes the constellation Coma Berenice, Berenice's hair. Berenice was the wife of Euergetes, an ancient king of Egypt. As her husband was preparing to set out on a perilous journey, she vowed that, should he return safely, she would cut off her hair, of which she was extremely proud, and offer it as a sacrifice to Aphrodite. On the king's return, Berenice kept her promise, placing her shorn locks in the temple of the goddess. Both of these make an appearance in Mark's Virgo section, including Berenice's hair, although I'm going to go deeper into Berenice because she has more to say about what's going on in this section. We'll cover each problem in turn. First, the drive for purity. John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us." This is directly connected with something that happened to Moses. Two men remained in the camp, one named Eldad and the other named Medad, and the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, and so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, "Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp." And Joshua, son of Nun, the assistant of Moses, one of his chosen men, said, "My lord Moses, stop them." But Moses said to him, "Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them." Really, the bottom line is, if you accept Moses, then you have to accept Jesus. And if you reject Jesus, then you have to reject Moses. It's simple math, really. And now, Berenice. Here she is, cutting off her hair. And here's our quote: "Cut it off, tear it out." And here's a line from Deuteronomy. I've suspected for quite a while it was related to our Markan quote. It fits in very nicely with its wider theme of body parts gone wild. "If men get into a fight with one another, and the wife of one intervenes to rescue her husband from the grip of his opponent by reaching out and seizing his genitals, you shall cut off her hand, show no pity. An offending body part, best get it off before it infects the other body parts." Here's a little more about Berenice. First, she's the queen of Cyrene. In approximately 249 BC, her father died, making Berenice ruling queen of Cyrene. Soon after her father died, Berenice was married to Demetrius the Fair, a Macedonian prince. Berenice had no children with Demetrius. After Demetrius came to Cyrene, he became the lover of her mother, Apama, apparently still a beautiful woman. In a dramatic event, Berenice had him killed in Apama's bedroom. Berenice stood at the door and instructed the hired assassins not to hurt her mother, while she attempted to protect her mother's lover. Apama lived on afterward. Although there were many plots to assassinate her, all hired assassins became fearful of her exceptional courage. Wow. Later, she became the queen of Egypt. Berenice is said to have participated in the Nemean Games between 245 and 241 BC, and to have competed in Olympic Games at some unknown date. Berenice had a strong equestrian background and was accustomed to fighting on horseback. According to Hyginus's Astronomica, he tells of when Berenice's father Magus, king of Cyrene in modern-day Libya, and his troops were routed in battle, Berenice mounted a horse, rallied the remaining forces, killed many of the enemy, and drove the rest to retreat. So she cut her hair like a man would, and she was a warrior and an athlete, just like a man. So she's a mannish woman. Now, I've said for quite a while that Jesus took the place of wisdom from the Old Testament. I know I'm not the only person who said that. Now, wisdom is a woman. So at some point, the woman had to become a man. And I think that happens in the Virgo section of Mark, or at least it's certainly alluded to. And if this woman has become a man, it does not surprise us that Jesus should be married to another man, which is what the censors tried to hide. Which is why I think the Virgo section of Mark is so short, the shortest in the whole gospel. Although I must now correct myself. Jesus marries Lazarus in the Scorpio section. The Scorpio section is also exactly 20 verses. Now, all this talk of women becoming men reminds me of a very weird saying from the Gospel of Thomas, which I think now is not so weird anymore. Simon Peter said to them, "Mary should leave us, for females are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "Look, I shall guide her to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every female who makes herself male will enter heaven's kingdom." I told you this gospel was important. This is Mary Magdalene. Guess what? Looks like she was a sister of Lazarus, which means she's not only high-born, but she was Jesus' sister-in-law. And I see there's another example of later church leaders blatantly rewriting the Bible to suit their theological agendas, so I'm not the only one to notice this. In this case, they're lying about Mary Magdalene's status in the early church, and this young scholar has proven that. And I think this is the perfect opportunity to bring in Mark's child, which we now see from a completely different angle, because whereas in the heavens it is a woman who holds a child to her bosom, here it is Jesus, now incarnated in the flesh of a man. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be the first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Berenice, as you now know, was originally from Cyrene. Well, guess who else is from Cyrene? I'll give you a hint. She was a woman who terrorized warriors and was famous for her hair, just like Berenice. That's right, Medusa. Heaven and earth, time and eternity, life and death even. Mission accomplished, wouldn't you say? As I've mentioned in other videos in this series, Mark is famous for its scandalously bad Greek. But I think it was meant for the masses. I think it was meant to be read out loud. I think some of it was comedy, almost a Monty Python skit. We know a lot about Jesus' character. We know he had a sense of humor, so this would have fit in very nicely. But I also happen to think it is the most intricately constructed of all the Gospels. So I think this man was quite capable of writing in good Greek. But that would have ruined the deceptive simplicity of his gospel. It's meant to work its way slowly under your skin, and using highfalutin, highbrow Greek would have just called attention to itself. So that's the end of my Virgo video in 2019. In about 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to look at Libra, which includes a little bit of Virgo. We'll see why.